In this video, we will talk about Consumer Price Index and how we calculate inflation. The main idea behind Consumer Price Index is to be able to measure price changes. At any point in time, there are prices which are going up, and some prices are always going down. Inflation measures the average change in prices. But then the big question is, what prices and what goods? Because we have so many different goods in the market, choosing the different basket of goods will give us different type of indexes. But from a consumer's perspective, the most relevant is the price of goods that an average consumer buys. And the Consumer Price Index tracks that. So consumers are more interested in looking at the price of the goods that they normally consume. Now, it's very hard to define what goods a consumer normally consumes. To come up with this, the BLS, or the Bureau of Labor Statistics, determines a basket of goods which a typical consumer might be consuming. This basket includes more than 300 items. The BLS then conducts surveys across the country to track the price of these items. These items include things like gas, electricity, clothes, etc. And then price of these items are surveyed and tracked every month across the country. The weighted average of these prices gives us the cost of the basket. What is this basket made up of? This basket has several categories. The largest category in this basket is housing. Housing comprises of almost 43% of an average consumer's spending, so that's the weight that housing gets. The next big category is food and beverages, which is almost 15% of the basket. Then we have medical services, we have educational consumer services, etc. So let's take a deeper look at one of the subcategories, food. Within food, we have another subcategory called food at home. Food at home accounts for 7% of weight in the CPI basket. Within food at home, we have several more subcategories like cereals, flour, breakfast cereal, rice, etc. In all, we have more than 300 product categories whose price is tracked. Now let's see, once we track the prices, how is CPI calculated? To do that, we can actually go to the government website called FRED, and we'll look at the data on CPI and inflation from there. So we can Google FRED. We will go to this first link, Federal Reserve Economic Data. This is a great repository of all various US economic data. It's a great resource to be aware of, great resource to play with. So let's go to this website, and we'll just type in CPI, or Consumer Price Index. Then we go to the CPI for all US cities. So this gives us the Consumer Price Index data from 1950 all the way to 2020. Now to calculate CPI, we need to determine the base year. In our current statistics, base year has been determined to be the average of 82 to 84 prices. So to calculate the CPI, we look at the cost of the basket in the base year, and then cost of basket in the current year. The ratio times 100 gives us the CPI. So if we hover around the 80s period, we see that between this 83 to 84, the CPI was roughly 100. And we can see that prices have been rising steadily. If we go far back in time, 1950s, the CPI hovered around 20s, 30s. Then as we go back in time, in more recent times, the CPI is a high of 256. So we see that over the past 50 years, prices, or the cost of the basket that consumers typically consume, has been steadily increasing. Now, inflation is the percentage change in CPI. To calculate inflation, we can use a simple formula where we look at the CPI of this year minus CPI of the previous period divided by previous period CPI times 100. So this gives us the percentage change in CPI, and this is the inflation that we hear in the news and that we track. So let's see how inflation has moved over the past 50 years in the US economy. We go back again to the FRED website. So here's our FRED series that we looked at initially. We have CPI on a monthly basis. We can go to Edit Graph, choose the frequency to annual, and then also display percentage change. So I'm going to go to units, and instead of blank, I'll say percentage change. And now we have our inflation data from 1950s onwards. We see that inflation has been increasing and decreasing. In fact, inflation was the highest in 1980. It was a high of 13.3%. And over time, inflation has been steadily declining. And in recent times, it has been around between 2 to 1%. And the latest data that we have is inflation at 1.25%.